Just as a reminder, we are recording today's webinar so that we can share it on the ASAP website for any additional views, or if you'd like to share with your colleagues or subrecipients on your projects, please feel free to do so. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. We have already quite a number of people joining us, and I can see from the chat you're joining us from all sorts of places: Nigeria, Zimbabwe, Eswatini. Wonderful. So my name is Susan Melnick, and I am the Strategic Communications Manager here at USAID's ASAP2 project. And we're going to go through a couple of slides today before we get started with the full webinar. And today's webinar is Business Development, Pre-RFA to Post-Submission Best Practices. Next slide, please. And again, if you're just joining us, go ahead and throw your organization and country in the chat so we can see where you're joining us from. We really appreciate getting to see everyone. And I know you can't see each other, so in the chat is where you can interact. As a reminder, feel free to use the chat throughout today's webinar, but we do like to use the Q&A box specifically for questions. You'll find it at the bottom of your screen. You can go ahead and pop that open, and you can see what questions your other colleagues are asking, and you can also ask your own questions there. We have a couple of different stops for the Q&A period, so it'll be about the middle of the presentation and again at the end. So feel free to keep adding your questions in there, and we'll get to them by the time we're finished this presentation. If for any reason, if we have a lot of questions today and we don't quite get through them all, our presenter will go ahead and answer those through writing, and we'll share those with you through our newsletter. We do have 3 polls today. So we have our usual end of webinar poll, and then our presenter has 2 additional polls that she's going to share with us throughout the presentation. They're going to pop up on your screen. You won't have to do anything special. Just go ahead and answer those questions when that screen pops up. And as a reminder, we are recording today's webinar, and we will share it. It'll be online by tomorrow morning. We'll also include links in the next newsletter that goes out. And I'll be sure, once I'm off camera here, to share the link to our past webinars and where this webinar will soon be posted in the chat. So you'll be able to see it there as well. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, this webinar series is a part of USAID and PEPFAR's ASAP2 project, and that stands for Accelerating Support to Advanced Local Partners. And our main focus on our project is to rapidly prepare local partners to have the capabilities and resources to serve as prime partners for USAID and PEPFAR programming. And this is ASAP2. We were also part of ASAP1. So we've been really proud to be working with local partners throughout sub-Saharan Africa for about 4 years now. Next slide, please. And these are just a few of the areas that we cover in ASAP as part of our capacity strengthening: financial management, human resources, communications, M&E, and organizational assessments. Next slide. And a couple of key results from the ASAP 1 and 2 project. So ASAP has supported 89 local organizations. We're very proud to have done so and very thankful to USAID for making that possible. And that has been in 18 countries. So as you can see in the chat, we cover many, many different areas. Our webinars are open to a global partner audience. So really glad to see people from all over. But our project is specifically focused in sub-Saharan Africa. Next slide, please. And as a reminder, all of these webinars are recorded, and we will share the presentation after the webinar as well. We've done 77 webinars, and you can access them all on our website. Next slide. And we do these webinars in 3 languages. So today it is done in English. And instead of simultaneous translation, we hold them separately in French and Portuguese. So please stay tuned to the newsletter, and we'll provide you the dates that those will be happening. We will have this webinar held in French in February. So the date will be coming very soon. Next slide. And as a reminder that we share both the presentation and the recording. So I know we often get lots of questions asking for the presentation because there's a lot of great information in it. So we do share that as a PDF, and then you can also rewatch the recording. And feel free, as I said, to share with your colleagues and your subrecipients. The ASAP2 project is about supporting potential prime partners. And of course, your subrecipients are an important part of your success. So we definitely want to help them as well. So feel free. Next slide. And as I mentioned, we do have some great upcoming webinars. So business development and highly effective boards will be held in February in French. And then in March for English webinars, we have a couple of strategic information webinars. So we will be holding those both in March and then in April. There will be 4 total. The first 2 in March are visualizations for effective program performance tracking. So choosing the right visuals, being able to show your results in a very impactful way, and bringing program data to life. So this one will focus on data processing and includes a demonstration of Power BI. So those will be great webinars, and dates will be forthcoming. You'll be able to sign up through the newsletter and through our website. Next slide, please. So that's enough from me. I don't want to take up any more time. I'm really excited today to introduce today's presenter. Rebecca Bowler is the Business Development Senior Manager for IntraHealth International. And IntraHealth International is the USAID ASAP2 Prime Partner. She was a presenter at the 4th Annual USAID Global Health Local Partner Meeting, which I was very excited to meet her in person. And she put on a great presentation there. It was something we heard about in our feedback survey that people were really excited to have attended. So this presentation is a version of that. And helping her today for Q&A will be Jennifer Bartlett, who is the Director of Business Development for IntraHealth International. So we're really excited to have you both, and we're here to support. So take it away, Rebecca.
Great. Thanks so much, Susan, for that great introduction and overview of ASAP. It's great to be with you all today. Hopefully I got to meet some of you at the local partners meeting, or got to meet other colleagues that might have been able to attend. So thanks so much for joining today. I'm going to go ahead and get started and just give you a little bit of an overview of the topics we'll be covering today. We're going to start with ideas and resources to identify potential opportunities and factors that go into making a go decision. And then we're going to jump into the pre-planning for opportunity release. And then we'll talk a bit about how to form a winning consortium. What are the different pieces and decision-making that go into forming those consortiums. And then we'll go into some live proposal development discussion. I'll pause then for some Q&A, and then we'll get back into finishing up the live proposal development discussion. And then we'll talk a bit more in depth about budget development, and then that final proposal finalization, submission, and post-submission process. And then finishing up with additional Q&A, additional discussion, hopefully sharing lessons learned along the way. So I wanted to start with a couple of poll questions, just to kind of get a sense from the audience here of your experience with proposal development and the type of topics that you're interested in hearing about today. So if you don't mind, to go ahead and make your choices on the poll that's popped up on your screen. I'll give you a minute or two to do that. And then Melissa, once you if you can see if there's a majority of answers have been given, feel free to bring up the poll results.
We'll give everyone just a minute.
Okay.
More. We've got about 40% so far.
Great. Thank you. All right. Great. So it looks like we have a range of preferences and things that you're interested in hearing about today, running the gamut. I know project technical design is very important and of interest for proposal development, budgeting, proposal management, also a challenge sometimes when we have resource constraints. And then it looks like about 76% of the participants have submitted a prime bid to USAID, CDC, or other non-USG donors. So we have a majority to USAID, some to CDC, and then to other donors. So that's great. Thanks so much for participating in that poll. That gives me a sense of your experience in doing prime bids. So we'll go ahead and get started into our presentation. Again, as we go, feel free to input Q&A into the Q&A chat box, and we'll get to those when we pause at that section. So the first bit I wanted to talk about with you all today is how to identify opportunities from USAID and other donors. And this presentation is primarily focused on USAID. But I have always said, if you can do a USAID bid, you can do a bid for any other donor, given how stringent and how many resources and how much detail USAID requires. So I think a lot of this is applicable to other donors as well. But of course, the best way to find out about new opportunities from USAID or other donors is direct outreach, and that gives you a sense, and that gives you the signal that the donor knows your organization. They know your work, they know your reputation, and they're reaching out to you directly with funding opportunities. So that's always a great sign. And it's very hard to pass up, and probably not something you would want to pass up. And then also becoming familiar specifically with USAID's country development cooperation strategy for your country or region. This is where USAID lays out its next 5-year strategy for each country or region, the types of programming that it wants to support, the development goals and objectives that it has for a particular country. So this is a great way to become familiar with USAID's priorities and what they're planning, and how you can position yourself with USAID on the different technical areas that they're looking to address. Of course, word of mouth through your networks, through colleagues, other donors, other stakeholders, as things are kind of getting back to normal somewhat after COVID, we're starting to have in-person conferences, in-person meetings, project kickoff or closeout events. And those are great opportunities to, speak with others in your networks, other partners, to find out perhaps, what plans are for future funding. So it's always good to keep up your networks and keep those open lines of communication. The most formal way to know what USAID is planning to fund in the future is its USAID Business Forecast. The forecast is a formal place where USAID posts its funding opportunities that it is planning to fund in the next fiscal year or next 2 fiscal years usually. And I'll show you an example of that on the next slide. But that's the formal place that USAID gives that indication of what they're planning to fund. Grants.gov, of course, is where USAID and other US departments and agencies post the RFAs and NOFOs for grant and cooperative agreement opportunities. So, and they also use it as a place to post what they are forecasting. So the CDC uses grants.gov to post what they are planning to fund. So you'll see it say forecast in the opportunity there. So another great resource, and something that most organizations should be monitoring on a daily basis. And then finally, websites, for other donors, of course, other foundations, corporations, INGOs are sometimes doing small grants programs or looking for partners. So, doing that donor landscaping, understanding what donors are funding programs and activities that your organization is specialized in is going to be a great first step for you to find those additional opportunities outside of US government. So I'm showing here a screenshot of the USAID Business Forecast. The USAID did update this format, I think, back in December. It's a little bit different than what it was, but overall still provides the same information. So when you go to the USAID Business Forecast website, it comes up at the top with a filter to choose, you see a variety of options to filter and find opportunities. But what I usually use on a daily basis is choosing operating unit. So that's where USAID has every country listed, every bureau or mission listed there. And that's an easy way to find opportunities that USAID is forecasting for your particular country or regionally. And then once you've been able to, do a search, try to find opportunities. This is an example of one that's currently on the forecast, which, as you can see, it's a little lacking in details, but I figured it was safe to use in this venue. You can see that USAID provides a title, which in this case, it's TBD. And at the top there, it also lets you know which fiscal year they're planning to award the project in, and also when this forecast entry was last updated. So it's a great way to keep track of, how often USAID is updating information on this particular site. I've circled a few places that are of particular interest, and it's nice that USAID has actually added this information in recent years, especially the eligibility criteria. Now that USAID is really focusing on localization, many opportunities are coming out for geared towards local organizations only. So in that eligibility criteria space, they will indicate if it's open competition, unrestricted. That means INGOs could bid on it, local organizations can bid on it. But if it is only for local organizations, they will indicate here that it's restricted for local orgs only. So that's a great place for you all to see, what are opportunities that are restricted for only local organizations in your country. The award action type is also important there, because that's where USAID indicates what type of award instrument they're going to use. Oftentimes for us NGOs, INGOs, we're looking for cooperative agreement and grant opportunities. But USAID uses a variety of award mechanisms. So, it might say contract, it might say IDIQ, which is an acronym for indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity mechanism, which is an umbrella contract mechanism. Not going to get into detail today, but just to say that this is where USAID is indicating the type of award mechanism they're planning to use, and that helps organizations understand what they need to prepare for and any risks that need to be managed. The other important information here, it's great that USAID lets us know the anticipated solicitation release date. So that's the date they're planning to release the final RFA, the final NOVO, the final RFP, and hopefully they're giving us plenty of time. Sometimes USAID does update these, and you can see that maybe they only say, well, it's coming out in a week, which can lead to some panic. But it's a good place to understand, how long you have to, prepare and do that pre-planning phase. And then the last couple of pieces here, the anticipated start date. So that's, when USAID plans to award and start the project. The total estimated cost is where you'll find information on what they plan to have as the budget ceiling. So as you can see, they give quite large ranges. But it's great to see that, USAID is giving indication on what they're planning. And then lastly, at the bottom, the change log. This is a new feature, I think that's come in the last year, and it's really helpful, as USAID updates this information, if they change the release date, if they change the total estimated cost, that log, it's going to show up here in this log so you can, understand what exactly USAID has updated. So that's really nice. And then, of course, when you're going on to grants.gov, my go-to is to, search grants. And then on the left side, you can see, you can choose which agency. So the first one is Agency for International Development. And you can see all of the opportunities that pop up there in order of posted date. So you'll see the most recent posts at the top there. You can also search for other opportunities with other U.S. government agencies like the U.S. Department of Agriculture, U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. That is where CDC is housed under, and opportunities for CDC come under that agency name. And so, when you're going through, you've, discovered USAID has posted something on the forecast, and you see that it's of interest, it's within your technical expertise, it's for your particular country or maybe particular even region that you work in. So what goes into making that go decision? And each organization has their own processes. Some are very in-depth, step-by-step, XYZ needs to happen to make a decision. Others, it's a little more of a collaborative effort with other staff. But really making a go decision, you really have to decide at an early stage, hopefully, if the opportunity, examining if it's within your experience or expertise. Is this something that you all, as your organization, have implemented previously, you're interested in implementing in the future, you have the in-house expertise, experts that can, run this project and get results. And of course, as we're seeing more and more, USAID and other donors are having integrated programming. So, you might be able to cover most of the programming that's under the project. But are there gaps in your expertise or your geographic presence? And if there are gaps, are there partners you can work with to fill them? Are there others working in that space that would be complementary to your expertise that would be a winning combination to implement the project? Something else to consider is it strategic for the growth or expansion of your organization and its mission? Most likely, yes, but if you have a strategic plan in mind, if you have a 5-year strategy for your organization, you have a different direction you want to go in than what you've previously been implementing, it is definitely something to consider. And then going back to the mechanism, is it being awarded through a mechanism that your organization can implement? Like I said, most of us NGOs, INGOs are operating under cooperative agreements and grants. But if USAID is using other mechanisms that you're not familiar with, that you haven't implemented under before, you might need to bring in expertise to help you with that. It might be such that you wouldn't pursue it because of the mechanism. And then you have to really examine, does this opportunity present any risk? And if so, can those risks be mitigated? Is it in a region that's difficult to work in, that has natural disaster risks? During the rainy season, it's hard to access villages that you're going to be working in. How are you going to mitigate those issues, as an example? And then finally, do you within your organization have the resources to pull together a high quality proposal by the deadline that USAID has indicated? Everyone has competing priorities and multiple programs going on at one time. There's just a lot of internal challenges that we face sometimes in having the human resources and other resources to pull together a proposal. So it's really something you have to think about and plan for as we move forward. But, if everything is kind of aligning and, going your way, then if the answer is yes to most of these questions, then you'll want to move into the next phase, which we call capture, which is a very business-like term. So you could also call it pre-planning. Once a go decision has been made, once you've decided, yes, we understand the opportunity that's coming up, we understand the timing, we know what resources we have to utilize, you're going to want to start this pre-planning phase. And of course, this is for competitive opportunities. If it's not a competitive opportunity, if it's a sole source opportunity, this won't be as important. But if you're competing against other organizations, doing this pre-planning work is really going to help you put your best foot forward and be really prepared by the time that final RFA is released by the donor. So pre-planning is an opportunity-specific process following a go decision that continues until the opportunity is released. It includes, but is not as limited to, a thorough assessment of the opportunity. So what is the technical areas? What are the geographic regions? What is the operating context? What is the donor looking for? What are other stakeholders looking for and to accomplish through this activity? And then you'll also want to take the time to analyze your competition. The competition is getting more fierce as time goes on, and it's really important to understand what other organizations are perhaps planning to do, what might be some of their strategies. Are they currently implementing in that context and not doing a great job, or they're doing a great job, might be hard to beat? What are those weaknesses that perhaps you can capitalize on within your proposal? And then it's also a chance to assess your own organization's technical capabilities as well as operational capabilities. What has your experience been implementing similar programs, perhaps in the same geographic area? What has been your previous experience working with this donor or other stakeholders that'll be interested in the opportunity and you'll have to work with during the implementation? I really encourage during this time to take a real critical inward look at your performance on previous programs and really, try to find those lessons learned, or where you've had challenges. What are you going to correct those challenges and improve on previous work? And then once you have this basis, you can then work to inform your strategy. How are you going to resource the proposal effort and identify your proposal team? Hopefully the folks working with you in the pre-planning stage are going to be working on the eventual proposal when it's released by the donor, or have a strategy of how to fill any gaps if there are. And you'll want to start thinking about your partnering strategy and beginning to build your consortium. Like I said earlier, if you have gaps, if you have areas that you're not an expert in, what are those other organizations that you can work with to ensure all the technical areas are covered or all the geographic areas are covered, and make sure that, you have a consortium that can implement this project to the highest standard. And you can also, during this time, do your initial technical management and budget strategies. Now, it really depends on how much information you have. USAID has, usually in the past released requests for information, draft scopes of work. And these are opportunities that to capitalize on if USAID is providing detailed information at an early stage. But sometimes all you have is what is, the 2 or 3 sentences posted on the business forecast, which makes it a bit harder to get into all of these details. But you're going to have to, agree on assumptions that you can make and move forward with some of these pieces. And then finally, it's not really the last and only thing you can do, but it's a great time to begin that recruitment of key personnel. As we know, USAID usually determines up to 5 positions in each activity or project that are considered key personnel. And, these are going to be top-notch, at the top of their game personnel that is going to be competitive to identify these folks to bring into your project to lead that project. So the sooner that you can start with recruitment, identifying potential key staff, the better. And now we'll talk a bit about forming a winning consortium. So, there's a lot of things to consider, and, it's never an easy cut and dried process. Sometimes it's easier than others, but again, especially with these large integrated programs that USAID is continuing to design, you really have to cover a lot of ground. I know under PEPFAR, you're looking at, care and treatment, VMMC, other, HIV related programs, but, there's always a nexus with other pieces of the development piece there. So things to consider when looking for partners, what are those complementary skills or expertise that you're looking for, but also making sure there's not too much overlap, because that can cause some I don't want to say conflict, but if two organizations who are very similar are working together, there can be a lot of discussion of who's covering what or who's going to be responsible for what. And it can get a little blurry there. So just making sure that the partners you're considering to bring on really complement and fill gaps on what you might be looking for, and making sure that there's a good working understanding of how you're going to work together. And then, of course, you really need to ensure that the partners you're talking to or considering have a good reputation and have credibility within the sector that you're looking at. So, you want to make sure that the word through the grapevine is that they're doing a good job on their current implementation, on their current projects, that they're not having any issues, that the donor looks well upon them and would like to see them working on this project. And this is a little more challenging. I mean, of course, you can look at formal midterm evaluation documents or formal reports from the project. But this is, again, where you can tap into your networks and really, talk to perhaps former employees that that used to work at an organization to find out, what is the reputation? What does the donor think of this partner? What is their reputation amongst other implementing partners? And then making sure that you're covering any strategic geographic areas. So again, if you've been implementing in a certain country or area and you're moving into a new geographic region, perhaps you need a partner that has been working in that region and at the ground level to bolster your proposal, to give you solid context of the local situation on the ground. Just really thinking about, if you need that geographic experience and expertise. History of positive performance. Again, this goes back to the good reputation and credibility, but, do they have a solid, positive working relationship implementing programs with the donor that you're applying to? Does USAID look upon them positively? Have they implemented and achieved results? Have there been performance issues? Did they lose their key personnel during the project? These are just things, that happen that you really want to make sure, for a partner you're bringing on, that they're bringing that positive piece to it. And then finally, you really need to consider what type of partners are needed. There's all kinds of ways to put your partnership and consortium together. Namely exclusive or non-exclusive. So, and sometimes USAID in the final NOFO will indicate if partners can be exclusive or require them to be non-exclusive to ensure that, competition is fair amongst all the groups. But, depending on if a partner is non-exclusive, you want to be careful in how you share information if it's a competitive, process, as they could be on multiple other bids, and you want to make sure that there's not a chance to share, important or proprietary information about your technical design or how you're planning to implement the project. It also makes a difference. Do you need a technical assistance partner? I mean, are you able to implement, but you need some bolstering on the technical side, to bring an organization in that specializes in a particular area that can provide that assistance? Or do you need an implementation partner? Again, I keep going back to the geographic piece because oftentimes, organizations will partner together and split geographic focus, as one partner might have experience working in one geographic area and another partner in another. And so, working with those local communities, they have the credibility to work in those areas, and it makes more sense for them to continue that. And then, there's resource partners. I've talked with colleagues. This is kind of was all the rage a few years ago, but what are partners that you're going to need to work with and tap into during implementation, particularly, stakeholders that you're going to be working with that are going to have interest in how the project is going. So there's a lot of different types of partners. I haven't captured them all here, but just to keep in mind, there's no only one way of identifying or engaging with partners. You can do it as needed for your needs. And then how to identify partners, a lot of times researching current implementers for USAID or other donors, who's doing this work currently, who is USAID working with in this space, what other donors are funding similar programming in this space. That really helps you to understand, the current context, what programming is happening, and making sure that it's, if it's overlapping, or, if one donor is funding one piece of the programming and USAID's covering another, it's just good to understand that and who they're working with. And of course, using your networks, again, your employees, perhaps they used to work at an organization that does the work that you're looking for, former colleagues that now work at another organization, just using that personal connections to, identify and talk to these other organizations. Again, attending industry sponsored events, or, I know technical working groups are not sponsored, but, those groups that give you that face-to-face interaction to understand what the organizations are doing, project closeout events, project startup events, international conferences, I know are being held again around the world. So attending conferences and understanding, what other folks are doing in your particular area of expertise will help make those connections as well. And then I wanted to also note that USAID has really revamped their website, and they have a workwithusaid.org website that's a resource hub for new, current, and future local and international partners. And actually, if you go on that website, there's a whole directory of organizations, and you can filter, by country, by technical expertise, et cetera, to identify organizations that have registered on this site. And I believe they provide contact information. So it's another way that USAID is really trying to foster collaboration and partnership. And I'm just going to go through here some tools that we use when we're forming a winning consortium, because of course, there's a lot of meetings, a lot of talking, but some concrete things that we use a lot, of course, are capability statements, having those 1 or 2 page summaries of your organization and your technical and geographic expertise. There's proof of your qualifications that you can send to partners that you're talking to, or partners that you want to consider to bring you onto their team, really detailing there what kind of results, what kind of work you've been doing. And then, of course, when you're getting more into formalizing that partnership, you're going to have to agree on a scope of work. So this is where, we agree on the partner's roles and responsibilities for not only for the project, but also proposal preparation. So this is where you can really lay out what your expectations are as a prime for any partners that you're bringing on as a sub. What do you expect them to contribute during the proposal preparation process? Do you expect them to participate in technical design workshops? Do you expect them to provide written inputs for your technical narrative? Just kind of thinking through what you might want them to contribute. And then, of course, for the project, laying out clearly as you can with the information you have of what the scope of work this partner will have for the project. What type of activities, what type of leadership will they have on the project? And then NDAs, this is getting into more of the legal side of things, but an NDA is a binding contract between 2 or more parties that prevents sensitive information being shared with others. So these are useful and important when you're having in-depth technical conversations or having sensitive conversations that maybe you haven't formally agreed to partner, but you need to have more in-depth conversations. And it's just a way to protect your organizations from and prevent any sensitive information to be shared. And then finally getting into, pre-teaming and final teaming agreements. So this is the documents that establish a formal relationship between your organizations and sets out the parameters under which you'll work, details of your scope of work. And again, these can be exclusive or non-exclusive depending on your preference, the partner's preference, requirements from the donor, depending. And you'll probably know, pre-teaming agreements are usually entered into before a final RFA is released and are subject to review once the RFA comes out. So, these are a bit more drafty, the scope of work is maybe a little more vague, but it does contain NDA information so organizations can work together before that final RFA release. And then the final teaming agreement is entered into upon release of the final RFA, because then you have, the full scope of work, you have the full understanding of what the donor is asking for, and you can finalize the terms of the agreement. Again, we encourage you to not share any proprietary or competitive information before signing a final teaming agreement. It's just important to protect your proprietary information and your technical design in competitive, competitive procurement situations. And of course, the final TAs, we really want them to be signed as soon as possible so that, you can continue to have meetings and sharing information. So we're finally getting to, we've done all these analyses, these assessments, we've identified our partners, we've formed our consortium, and then you check grants.gov and boom, the live proposal has been posted. As you can see, this proposal is for an imaginary country called Avalisa. And, anytime we see, no matter how much preparation we do, no matter how many months you've been preparing, when you see that final RFA go onto grants.gov, it feels like panic. And you shouldn't panic, but there's a little twinge of panic when it's, because the culmination of all your work is coming to a head right now. But if you've been able to plan and prepare and do this background work, the pre-planning work, you shouldn't be panicking. It should be a chance to say, okay, we're finally ready to go. Let's get this proposal together and get it to the donor. So, we have the proposal here. We have the deadlines. We have deadlines for questions. When is it finally due? This is only the first page, perhaps of 50 to 100 pages that you'll have to read. So it's been released, now what? And the most important thing is to start to get organized. And hopefully you've been organized. Hopefully you've, identified your proposal team and, if everything's in place to transition to this live proposal development phase. So getting organized, making sure you're streamlining that coordination and communication, that everyone knows that the RFA has been released, knows what the deadlines are, knows what the responsibilities are, and then making sure, there's kind of a central person who folks can go to when they have questions or need information. And again, keeping people informed. Of course, the proposal team needs to be informed and well aware of, the calendar and everything that's going on, but, others around the organization will probably want to know and be kept up to date. So figuring out how you're going to keep others informed. And, allocating proper resources. So again, hopefully the folks that you've been working with on the pre-planning phase are going to continue to work with you through that proposal development phase. But, sometimes folks are out of office or it's conflicting with other work that's going on. So, analyzing and reallocating resources as needed. Do you need to find a consultant? Just understanding the resources that you have, any gaps and how to fill those quickly. And then, how are you going to ensure quality and compliance? This is a major piece that's always on my mind when I'm managing proposals is, being compliant with what USAID's asking for, ensuring we're understanding the instructions, understanding all of the pieces that they're asking for. It's really important to monitor that throughout the proposal process. And then, establishing your knowledge management. Hopefully, again, that's been established prior to the final RFA release, but, agreeing on how you're going to share information. Where are you going to save documents? Are you going to share documents? How do you expect folks to work together? Because at the end of the day, you have to produce a physical electronic copy of your proposal. So, there are tangible things that need to be created and reviewed throughout the process. So you need to make sure that you establish your knowledge management, where you're saving things, how folks can access them. And, again, live proposal development, what to do first. So you have this RFA, there's a million things you need to do. And as you can see, I've listed 7 things. I know that there's more than this many things, and everything feels like you have to do it first. But the most important thing is to read the RFA. And again, I know it can be challenging with everything else going on. And sometimes they're very long documents. RFAs can be 50 pages, they can be 150 pages. It really depends on how much detail and how much information USAID is providing. But it's really important for everyone on the proposal team to read the RFA. To make sure that you go through each of the sections to understand what the requirements are, what USAID is asking for in the submission, what background information you need to have, to put this proposal together. Identify or reconfirm your proposal team and make assignments. So again, with your pre-planning team, hopefully it's the same folks you'll continue to work with, but perhaps they need to hand off to someone else. So making sure that your proposal team is identified, that everyone knows what's expected of them, that everyone has an assignment, has a deadline, and understands their role throughout the process. And then, creating or reviewing your calendar, having that final deadline allows you to finally plan out, how are you going to work together over these next 4, 6, 8 weeks to get this proposal together. And this is really where people can go to understand, okay, I'm working on this piece of the proposal. What are my deadlines, or what is the final deadline before we submit? And I'll show you an example of a calendar in a later slide here. Creating a compliance matrix to review RFA requirements, evaluation criteria, and compliance. So this is a tool, it's my favorite tool that I've been working with over the last 12 years I've been in business development. It's my favorite thing to put together once an RFA is released. And it does exactly what it says. So it's a compliance matrix. It's kind of a distilled, it's a document where you can distill down the RFA requirements, evaluation criteria, and compliance pieces into probably, an 8 to 10 page document. Of course, again, reading the whole RFA, but this is a document, a tool that you can kind of pull all that important information into for a quick reference as you're working through the proposal. And again, I'll show you an example of this in a couple of slides. Going back to your partnership configuration, again, this needs to happen pretty quickly after your proposal, after the final RFA is released, as you need to make sure, is the scope of work for the RFA the same as what you had thought? Is something missing that you had brought a partner on and perhaps, their scope of work isn't applicable anymore? Are there new pieces to the project that you hadn't been aware of that you need to add a partner for? This is just really time to take, stock of your current, partnership consortium and to see, does it still make sense? Do we need to make adjustments? And of course, your plan to keep partners informed throughout the process. So letting them know that the RFA has been released. Giving them a calendar. What do you expect of them? What deadlines do they need to hit for you to get all their pieces together? And then, review, reconfirm key personnel or other staff candidates and gear up to fill any gaps. That period, again, of pre-planning is a great time to do that recruitment, but sometimes it doesn't all get done. So it's really important to identify what staff can help, identify those key personnel candidates that you need to bring on and make sure that those gaps are filled. And then when in doubt, read the RFA again. You can always read, I always read an RFA multiple times during the process just to make sure I'm not missing anything, to make sure I didn't gloss over anything, to double check what the requirements are. That RFA is going to be your best friend over the course of the weeks that you're putting that proposal together. So when in doubt, always go back to that RFA to answer your questions. And, I keep talking about a proposal team, and I know organizations are of various size and of various human resources. So, of course, ideally, in a perfect world, we would all have business development teams and technical teams with extra time to work on proposals and fill all of these roles individually. But sometimes, folks have to do double or triple duty, and we certainly understand the challenges that goes along with that. But for your organization, it's really important to define the roles that are critical for success and how your staff can fill them. And ensuring that proposal team roles and responsibilities are clear and communicate often together. So functions you want to think about filling, who can keep us organized, who can communicate, who can manage our knowledge management, make sure things are saved correctly in the files, that other people can find them, kind of that central person that, you could ask them any question and they'll know what exactly is happening. Again, the technical and M&E leadership, those can often go hand in hand. Having your technical lead, leading the design, leading what our strategies are, identifying what activities, we're going to undertake and how we're going to monitor activities. And then, of course, we need someone who's comfortable budgeting, hopefully someone in finance, someone that's comfortable working in those Excel file templates. It's a very, very important piece of the proposal process, ensuring that the technical and the budget are aligning and working together. So again, a very important role to identify. Again, HR recruitment, getting those key personnel identified, getting their CVs, getting their letters of commitment, negotiating their offers. There's a lot of specifics on the HR side that I'm not adept or well known or know very well. So, we need those HR professionals to help us with that piece. And then, of course, reviewing throughout the proposal process is really very important. It's a time to, pause, take a look at, your technical strategies, take a look at the compliance, where are we at on the budget, and ensuring those reviewers are kind of outside of the proposal team so that they have fresh eyes and can provide, fresh feedback and insightful feedback as you're going forward. So here I've produced an example proposal calendar. Now you'll see some white spots, and on a normal proposal calendar that I put together, there probably won't be any blank days on here, but for the sake of this presentation and to not overwhelm you, I've put in the most important deadlines and dates here that you can see. And usually when I'm putting a proposal calendar together, a best practice is to work backwards from the deadline. So you have that final deadline here on April 29th. How many days do we need to submit it? How many days do we need to do that final copy editing and formatting? And, towards the end of this presentation, we'll get into some of the best practices on submission and finalization, but just ensuring that you're saving time at the end, for the final packaging and getting it to the donor, and make sure there's plenty of time to confirm that they've received it. I have some horror stories I could share about submitting proposals last minute. So we want to encourage you to submit at least a day or two beforehand. But working backwards, as you can see, setting those final deadlines so that your budgeter knows, okay, I need to be prepared to have the final budget ready by this date. That means they need to do the final review before then. They need to get final budgets, doing reviews along the way. When do you need those final CVs or final letters of commitment? When and how are you going to hold your technical review meetings, for reviewers to take a look at your technical narrative, your management section, your M&E plan, making sure you have those outside eyes to review. And that all, as after those first drafts that the team produces and, those technical strategy meetings and key personnel interviews, there's just so much to fit in the few weeks that you have during a live bid. That's why, and when, pre-planning for proposals becomes so important because, for this example, USAID kindly gave 8 weeks, but sometimes USAID only gives 4 weeks or less, depending. So the more you can get done, the more pre-work you can do before that final RFA is released and you have that deadline is really for the better. And ensuring along the way that you're asking USAID questions by their deadline. It's a really key time to ask questions and get clarity from USAID. And this here is the compliance matrix that I refer to, and every organization I've worked at has a little bit different of a template, and I think you can probably Google and find templates. This is a known tool that we use, but as you can see, it's a condensed version of the RFA, like I mentioned, with the deadlines right up front. What are our deadlines? What's the final submission deadline? When are questions due? Who do you send them to? How do you get them there? And then proposal specifics. So this is, where I go to, I'm like, what was the page limit or what type of font are we supposed to use? And as you can see, and as you probably know, if you've worked on USAID bids before, USAID is very prescriptive on, everything from, spacing, what type of font to use, what font size, margins, if you need to submit it in Word or PDF. So it's really important that you have all of these really identified and clear upfront for everyone working on the proposal so that they know these are the constraints we're working in. These are the fonts that we need to use to ensure that we're compliant. Because again, these might seem like small, who cares what font size, but the donor has said what type of font they want you to use, and you need to use that. Because if you don't, you're not being compliant, and that's an easy way for USAID to weed out, proposals and say, okay, you didn't follow the guidance, you didn't follow our directions, we're not going to review your proposal. So you don't want to ever come up upon that. And the compliance matrix is great, again, to have that evaluation criteria right up front so that everybody knows, okay, the technical approach here, it's worth 50 points. It's the most important. We need to give the most, space to this in our 30-page proposal. And then we have to talk about management and staffing and organizational capacity. So keeping those evaluation criteria in the back of your mind at all times. This is a second page of the compliance matrix here that gets into the details of, okay, USAID's requiring us to have a cover page, and they provide all of the instructions on what should be on that cover page. They're saying it could only be 1 page and who's responsible. So again, I really use this document as a way to manage the team, to make sure assignments are clear so that everyone understands, this person is putting the cover page together. This person is writing the executive summary and the technical approach. And this is how many pages will go towards that. So it's just a really great tool that I would encourage everyone to create or to find. It's just really, really useful during the entire proposal preparation process. And then we're going to go through questions to the donor, and then we'll pause for the Q&A. And just a few words on questions to the donor. When asking USAID or another donor a question on the RFA, there's some things to consider. It's not just like, oh, I wonder what they'll say to this. You really need to frame your question in a way that the donor can easily answer, and answer in a way that you'd like to see. So usually that's, asking the question so that USAID can say yes or can say no, instead of leaving it open-ended where they could, just say, refer to page 15. That doesn't really answer your question. But if you have a specific question, an easy one, I keep going back to font. or, font size, but, if USAID doesn't say, what font size to use for text boxes or graphics, that's an easy question that you can ask. Would USAID allow us to have graphics in 10-point font? And that's an easy yes or no answer. And they might say no. And then you have to revert to the 12-point font that's required. But, you also want to consider, will your question give away your technical approach or strategy? Because again, USAID is going to take all these questions, they're going to answer them, and they're going to put them all back out for all of the potential competitors to see. So you really want to be careful. Will your question give away, again, your approach, your strategy, an activity that you're planning to do? You just want to be really careful on, what you're sharing in those questions. And again, thinking, could the donor answer in a way that won't help you clarify or won't help you, satisfy your question? So, again, framing the question in a way that the donor can easily answer it and that it will be clear for you as the recipient. And then even making sure and asking yourself, do we need to ask this question? Or can we make an assumption and proceed? Because sometimes asking questions can open a can of worms, can cause more confusion, or can cause, it might cause you to question what you were planning. And if it's not a compliance issue, if it's more of a, it's up to you to decide in your proposal what you're going to present, then maybe it's best to assume, it's best to not ask the question and to go ahead with, what you are planning. So there's a little bit of an art to, asking questions, especially to USAID, and it does take time, but, making sure that you have the questions in advance, that you're reviewing them as a team, getting opinions from others. It's a really important part of the process. All right, so I'm going to pause there for our Q&A. I'm going to ask Jennifer to help me go through. I think we have a few here.
There are, Becky. So
great.
Thanks for that awesome presentation. That was a lot of information. And there seemed to be a lot of questions about exclusive and non-exclusive partnerships and the importance of forming consortiums. So I've answered in the chat already to a number of these questions that you can go with more than one prime IP as a partner. So you can be a sub on 2 or even 3 different bids, but you need to negotiate that with the prime. They all need to know that that's your choice, and you have to have it stated in your pre-teaming agreement or your teaming agreement that you are a non-exclusive partner. So this means that you are choosing to be on multiple teams. And this is great in some situations for local organizations because you can hopefully increase your chances of being on a winning team. However, there are trade-offs. If you're a non-exclusive partner, you probably won't be as deeply involved in the strategy development with the primes because you're going on more than one team, and the prime is going to be concerned that their strategy and ideas are going to be shared with others inadvertently just because they're known, not because you have the intention of sharing them. So usually a prime, if they're accepting a sub as a non-exclusive partner, they won't share the draft with you. They won't have deep they won't engage you deeply in the technical strategy development. They will ask you a lot of questions. They will try and include your ideas in the draft and in their strategy, but there will be limited sharing. Becky, I don't know if you want to add to that or say something more, or if others have questions following that.
Yeah, I think you've nailed it there. You really have to decide for yourself, what is your own strategy. Even as a sub, you can have your own strategy, and like I said, oftentimes now USAID is not allowing for exclusive partnerships under RFAs. So that does open up the opportunity, and everyone has the understanding that you're not going to be exclusive. So just seeing what the donor says and what is best for your own organization. Mhm.
There's another question about why is the incumbent not mentioned by USAID in the forecast? I
Yeah.
can take this one just quickly. I think it's been asked for USAID to note the incumbent by different IPs as a request to change the forecast, but they haven't done it. I think in part they struggle to think of something as a direct follow-on, and I think they think that most projects are new and different and incorporate elements of previous projects more than just one. So I think often they don't like to say that there's clearly one incumbent because they see this as a new project, but they have been asked to do this and they haven't done it yet, unfortunately.
I will add on the business forecast, there is an option to download it onto an Excel file. And so actually in the Excel file, there is some information that doesn't show up on your on the website like search page. So in there, it does have a column for incumbents. Again, sometimes it's filled in, sometimes it's not. So there's kind of sneaky ways that USAID shares information that's perhaps doesn't come up first on the screen, but that's another way that USAID does, give some information, but not always consistent.
There are also questions about key personnel and standard formats for CVs and presenting them. Do you want to take that one?
Sure. Let's see if I can find them. Oh, yeah. Yeah, so every organization that I've worked at, and Jennifer, you've probably experienced the same, everybody has their own format, but it's generally about the same. Having your of course, name and title and giving a paragraph of background information and really delineating in that first paragraph why and how the candidate meets all of the requirements. I've called it a bio blurb or some kind of blurb at the top that gives a summary of the candidate. And then of course, USAID usually does share in the RFA, what they're looking for in the CV, education, what is the required education? What are their required number of years of experience? Are they looking for certain language skills? So it's making sure that you're addressing those on the CV up front is really important. And then going through, to show their experience, usually in chronological order, going backwards, how we usually do CVs, what is their current position, what are their current roles or responsibilities, and going back. And usually USAID asks for references, so 3 references. You'll have to identify and vet those references to make sure that when USAID is checking references that, it's a good reference to check. So I've seen all kinds of different templates, and I can work with Susan and team if we can share sample CV templates. I think if you go online and Google, I think you can find those as well. But, and usually, the constraint is that USAID is limiting those CVs to maybe 2 or 3 pages. So again, it's hard to fit all of that information into 2 or 3 pages. So you do have to do some creative formatting.
And I would say it's worth your while to spend time on the CVs to make
Mhm.
sure that you're hitting the bullets that they've asked for in the RFA really clearly and that there's no vagueness. You don't want to just take someone's CV and cut it down to 3 pages. You really want to spend time on it, tailor it to make sure that it's really addressing what USAID wants. And, they look like they're going to be the best leader of that program, because your key personnel can win you the bid if you have someone who's exciting and you're presenting that information clearly so that it meets all the evaluation criteria. It matters. It matters a lot, and it will increase the scoring of your proposal. Some of the other questions here, Becky, are USAID is looking for new partners, and how do organizations like IntraHealth, what do we look for in choosing new players?
You mean new partners to work with?
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I think for us, we often look for organizations that are local, who know the context. We look for organizations that are filling gaps that we have in our consortium. In terms of new players, I think we look for organizations that are doing innovative things, maybe in a niche area like in data analytics or something like this, doing something new that could add an interesting element to our team and our proposal, or that USAID is excited about for some sort of reason. So I think innovation and making sure that our partners are complementary to our own skills. Someone's asked, how long does it take a local community organization to become a prime? Do you want to take that one?
Sure, I have. That's a good question. It's what really what the ASAP project is really helping to do. And it can take a long time because USAID, US government in particular, has very stringent compliance, financial reporting requirements that it takes a while, I think, for local organizations, non-US based organizations to learn and to get up to speed on. And I think USAID's aware of that. I think it's a conversation that they're having, in terms of requirements and how to support local organizations to get USAID funding. And I think our ASAP colleagues can probably speak more to this, because I think it can be a long process, but if you're willing to engage and there's consultants or other organizations that can work with you to review and assess your systems and provide advice on how to get up to that level. But I do think it can take years. It might just be one of those long-term strategic goals that an organization might have.
I think Melissa wants to chime in on this. Melissa?
Yeah, great.
Oh, no, I'm just monitoring the questions to make sure people know that they're getting answered. But yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
I think it's a slow build. You don't want to go from never having received any USAID money directly as a prime to like a $30 million bid. That's a really big jump. So I think you want to build slowly, and just keep growing and taking on more so that you're seen as reliable and responsible and kind of a safe option.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think one way that many organizations do that is becoming a sub-recipient to an INGO, and perhaps in your negotiations with them, asking them to support you to understand how US government funding works, how to pursue the funding, what systems you need to have in place. But starting out as a sub-partner in small roles, building those roles, building partnerships with prime recipients can really aid in that progression as well.
Someone else has asked, can one person be key personnel on proposals submitted by different organizations? And I think the answer to this lies in every RFA. Theoretically, you can be, unless the RFA says that key personnel have to be exclusive, which they don't normally say, but sometimes they'll say that key personnel cannot be exclusive, which means they're non-exclusive and can be on more than one bid. However, if you know that your key personnel is on more than one bid, then you're not differentiating yourself in your own bid. They are on someone else's bid. So if you know this person is like really highly desired by USAID and could win it for you, then you want them, and it probably doesn't matter if they're non-exclusive because at least you know that they're really highly valued and they're on your bid. But it doesn't differentiate you. It's not like going to help you win the bid because they're on someone else's team too. So it makes you less interesting and valuable to the consortium if you're on more than one bid.
I think I might pause this here and go back to the presentation, and then leave more time at the end for more Q&A, and anything again we don't get to today, we'll try to write and distribute responses. But I'll go ahead and turn back to the webinar. Thanks, Jennifer, for coming on to help with that. Appreciate it. So I'm going to jump back over here. We're going to get into more of the live proposal development pieces, and I'm going to go through each of these sections. It's probably maybe not going to be to the depth. This is really an overview of what USAID and other donors look for in these pieces. So again, please have any questions or comments. We'll be glad to talk about that later. But the technical approach, as shown in the compliance matrix, is usually the highest value in terms of the evaluation criteria for USAID bids in particular. So it's really your chance. This is where USAID expects you to describe your approach and your rationale to address the challenge, to address the opportunity, outlined in the solicitation. So how are you going to tackle, the challenge or the specific objective that USAID's wanting? Again, this is going to be the largest section of your proposal, the one you give the biggest real estate as far as page numbers in your proposal, and it carries the most weight in the scoring. So you want to be sure that it demonstrates your understanding of the programming, the context, the stakeholders that are going to be involved, that it describes how you will achieve the objectives, just not what objectives, but how you're going to operationalize and achieve objectives. Usually includes a performance monitoring, evaluation, and learning plan, which we'll get into as well. And really shows to USAID what specific interventions you're proposing to achieve activity goals. And then finally, outlining how you'll test, document, and share best practices and lessons learned. So again, that kind of gels with the M&E piece, but how are you going to bring innovation? How are you going to try new things, hopefully that are going to achieve results? The management and staffing plan is usually the second most important as far as evaluation criteria. And you'll want to use this, and USAID requires for you to identify, what partners you're going to work with, what subrecipients you're going to work with. In this section, you'll also, establish the lines of authority, communication, and reporting. So what is your role as a prime, or what is the role of the subs? How are you going to coordinate? How are you going to work together to implement the project? And it's also where you show, the key staff, key personnel. How are you going to bring in that technical expertise into the project? So again, who are those key personnel? What are their experience? What is their expertise? Who are the non-key personnel that are also essential to the project? Again, USAID usually requires up to 5 key personnel, but it certainly takes more than those 5 people to successfully implement the project. So what are those non-key staff that are essential? And then, of course, as an annex, providing those CVs of the key personnel, usually required. Usually, again, USAID is providing you with what they want to see in the CV, how to demonstrate how these staff meet the qualifications and requirements from USAID. And, you'll need to include usually an organizational chart. I've included a more simple example here. I've seen very complicated ones, but you really have to develop your organizational chart early. And this is a key piece of, costing out the budget. If you're staffing $100 million project is much different than staffing for a $20 million project. These are major cost drivers that you need to consider, and you need to, sometimes again in that pre-planning stage, make assumptions for. You might not know every detail of the scope of work. You might not even be clear on that final budget ceiling, but you need to make some assumptions of what you can, plan for as far as staffing for the project. And of course, staffing needs vary depending on the type of project. Is it a service delivery project? Is it a technical assistance project? Those org charts look very different from each other. So keeping those in mind of, what are the activities that you're going to be doing, and how do you staff those? And, again, balancing your budget to ensure that, you have appropriate percentage going between staffing and going between activities. USAID wants to see value for money. They want to see that you're going to, produce a lot of results in value for the amount of money that they're contributing for the project. So you really want to make sure the budget demonstrates that on a high level. So as you can see on the org chart, using color, using borders to identify key staff, or, if the staff are based in a project office, or if are they based at a facility, where do the partner staff fill in? These are all important pieces to show USAID how you're going to operationalize the project. And then the monitoring, evaluation, and learning plan. So, this is where you identify the program goals and objectives, because again, USAID is giving this funding, and they want to make sure that it's being monitored, that, the progress of the project is being evaluated, that they're taking lessons learned. So that also includes identifying, defining indicators, and you'll want output and outcome indicators. Sometimes these are provided by the RFA. USAID also has standard indicators that they use, and then you can also, create custom indicators, but you need to make sure that these indicators are measurable, that you can report on them, that you can show results through those. You also want to define your data collection methods and the timeline. If you're doing a baseline assessment, if you're doing midterm or end line, what are those steps in the process throughout the proposal that you're going to be able to monitor progress. It's also where you'll identify M&E roles and responsibilities. So, who are those staff that are responsible? Do they have the expertise? Do they have the experience? How are they, working with the other members of the project? And then, creating analysis plans, reporting templates, and your plan for dissemination and donor reporting, because these are, this is a very important piece of the donor reporting as you're implementing the project. And finally, usually this organizational capacity and history of performance is a third most important piece of the proposal. And organizational capacity is usually a narrative as part of the technical application. And this is where you demonstrate you can perform the scope of work for the opportunity. And that's where you use your past experience or current work that you're implementing to show that, we've done this work before, we've done it in the area that you've asked, the geographic area. And this is how, we're demonstrating that we can do it for this next project. And this is also, you'll include for yourself if you're a prime, or, you'll be expected to contribute as a consortium partner to bolster that expertise, to bolster and say, our consortium as a whole has the organizational capacity to implement this project. And then history of performance, past performance, PPRs, you've probably heard all of these different phrases. This is something that usually goes in the annexes and uses the template that I've included a screenshot here on the right. Usually USAID provides the template, but there's, standard templates, or you can create your own. And this is to describe a specific project that you've recently implemented, usually within the last 3 to 5 years. That's related, similar to the scope of work of the proposal you're putting in for the project. And the key difference here between this and the organizational capacity is, as you can see in the last section there, USAID is actually asking for a contact or two from the donor that you're implementing that current project for, because USAID is going to contact those staff people and ask them, how was this organization's performance on the project you funded with them? Did they have performance issues? Did they have issues with their staffing? Did they meet the results? Did they produce results? Were they on time? Were they on budget? So this is a really important piece to, be strategic and make sure that, if someone contacts your donor, that your donor is going to have positive things to say. And likely, if you have a project that's only been implementing for a few months or a year, you're not going to have results to share in a past performance reference. So, you want to be strategic about what projects you present in this template and make sure that it's a project that you can show results and that you can show that you've done the work and that it's gone positively. And then, cross-cutting issues, USAID, as we know, likes to pile things on, and we know that there are cross-cutting issues that just, no matter what type of project it is, if it's, HIV, if it's maternal child health, et cetera, there's always other issues that impact the work that you're going to be doing. So for example, the donor may require you to speak on other issues like gender. It might not be the main focal point of the project, but gender obviously impacts how you can implement. What are the contextual issues that you have to deal with to implement a project to ensure you're, meeting the needs of the population, that you can reach members of the population. So, USAID might require you to conduct a gender analysis and incorporate activities to ensure that you're reducing gender gaps. You might have to put together a gender action plan to show that, you're really tracking how you're, incorporating and reducing gender gaps in the activities that you're delivering. Youth, of course, is another big piece of consideration, and they might require you to develop youth-friendly service packages or use a positive youth development approach to propose activities. So, just keeping in mind that in addition to your technical strategy and the technical sector or project topic that you're addressing, there are other cross-cutting pieces that the donor is going to ask you to keep an eye on and track and incorporate into your activities. And I want to mention reviewing again. You've spent time to put all of these different pieces together. You're working so hard on the technical approach, on your strategy, on your M&E plan, getting the management and staffing together. But you really need to take time to pause and review. So each organization needs to define what your milestones are for reviews, and at what points in the process that you're going to have reviews. And make sure that you're following a consistent process for each review, giving reviewers instructions, having people understand how you choose reviewers. Usually it's someone that has technical expertise, that is knowledgeable about the context, that knows, the donor. There's a lot of different factors to bring into consideration when identifying reviewers. And once you've identified those reviewers, who should be separate from the proposal team, so they have fresh eyes, they're coming in like the donor, reading your proposal and, understanding from the outside point of view. And if you need to train them in how to review, you can do that. Not everyone knows how to review and give good feedback. And there are resources out there to help teams, undertake review processes and how to train reviewers. So would encourage you to think about, how you want reviewers to participate and make the most of their time. So here I've just included a few examples of reviews. I'm sure there's an opportunity for a lot more. It just really depends on what you have time for in your pre-planning and live proposal development processes. But I think the most important is, during that live proposal development, taking the time to pause and review your technical approach, to review, your staffing and management, having someone review your CVs. Like we said earlier, it's really important to write those CVs up to show that those personnel meet all of the requirements and have all of the qualifications that USAID is looking for. So having someone review those is important. So I've listed quite a few things here. I won't go through them all, but just making sure, you're taking that time and reviewing the budget as well. You need to review the budget, make sure that it matches what's going on in the technical approach. And then after, a proposal submitted, reviewing what the lessons learned or how do you make improvements to your proposal development process. There's a lot of opportunities to review and reflect. So I would really encourage that. We'll spend a little bit of time here getting into budget development. So, it's towards the end of the presentation, but that doesn't mean it's not as important as the technical, building the technical approach or technical application. Budget development, is really key. And again, going back to the RFA and reviewing what the cross presentation should look like, and then using and modifying templates. But keeping in mind, USAID is going to evaluate your cost proposal, and I have a little asterisk. The cost proposal includes your budget, and also the budgets of your sub-partners at the time. So you might have 3 or 4 budgets going into one cost proposal that USAID is going to review. And the 3 points that USAID is going to evaluate you on is if number 1, are your costs reasonable? So are they generally recognized as ordinary and necessary? Could I go and Google how much a flight costs from point A to point B, and it would generally be, in that range. The second is allocable. So the costs that are incurred are specifically for this award. So you want to be very careful that, in these proposal budgets, you're only putting in costs that are needed to implement this project, and not, to fund things outside, to fund things happening at your HQ. You just want to be really clear that these costs are needed to implement this award. And then the third one is allowable. So USAID is going to be reviewing that these costs are not disallowed by the terms of the award. So it really depends on the type of instrument that USAID is using, and what they allow or don't allow. But, usually for cooperative agreements, for example, construction is not allowed. So, we know working in, for example, health facilities that, it would be great if we could use funds for projects to do some refurbishment or rebuild, buildings that have been damaged in natural disasters. But unfortunately, USAID funding under cooperative agreements does not allow for construction. So if they would see something like that in your budget, they would ask questions, or they would disallow and not allow you to do that type of activity. But overall, the coordination with other teams is just really key for successful budget development. It's really the nexus of where, okay, we've designed this beautiful project. How do we allocate the budget? How do we show USAID that they're getting value for their money? And of course, you're probably familiar with all the budget categories. There's about 8 different budget categories here. We'll touch on them a little bit as we go, but, as if you've worked on USAID or other USG proposals, there's a lot of budget details that are required upfront, and it's really necessary to make sure we're presenting those in a way that it's easy for USAID to find. I wanted to make a comment particularly on salary and wages. You can see here I've presented some graphs. So ASAP, conducted a salary survey back in April of 2021. So ASAP, the project, administered this salary survey to gather information about local partners, including their number of staff salaries, salary scales, benefits information, reasons for attrition. And you can see in these graphs here, shown in the figures below, most positions paid by local partners are paid below the 25th percentile market rate, according to the Birch's Group survey. So Birch's Group is a known group that works in the international development space that, organizations go to for salary information to understand what's going on in the market. So as you can see across these 3 groups, and we have different grades in each one, depending on, the type of job, the type of expertise required. But as you can see, in red there, that these positions are paid below the 25th percentile. And that's not good, as you can see, and as you I'm sure experience, competing with other organizations for quality staff. perhaps competing with other INGOs for staff. It's very challenging. So we wanted to share this information for your knowledge, and some takeaways on this specific subject is for you, to be aware of the market standards for different positions and implement actions that allow you to be competitive within the local job market. Every country is different, even different regions within countries are different. So, it's really up to you to keep track of those differentials, but to, review your salary scales and revise them as needed. Doing comparisons within the market, understanding what your, competitors or partners that you work with, what are their kind of, you might not know exactly their salary scales, but, comparing within the market, where are people being driven to? And, importantly, during the proposal process is budgeting for these positions as needed for new awards. So, in that budget, you can say, what are the required salaries at those different levels? And it's important to budget for them and ask USAID for those funds. And then outside of, proposal processes, advocating with USAID for what's needed to ensure you can hire and retain high caliber staff. They need to understand as the donor what your constraints are, what your challenges are, and upfront and advocacy with the donor can really help them understand what's going on. As you know, USAID has a standard template that they use for budgeting, and it's a mandatory. Usually, it's provided with the RFA release, and it doesn't usually change, but it can change depending on how they want it presented. If they want it by year, if they want it by technical area, it could differentiate how you put it together. But generally, there's a standard budget format that you will use, and you'll ask your partners to use. And you can always, make changes to this template as far as making it compliant with your own internal policies, creating formulas, creating, how do you pull information from other tabs to make sure everything's presented on the summary. So, using the formal template is required, but within that template, you can customize to the needs of your organization. And I'm going to talk a little bit here about indirect costs. During the local partners meeting in Johannesburg, this was a hot topic, and one of our ASAP colleagues gave a great presentation on that, but I'll touch on it briefly here. Indirect costs are those costs that are typically cannot be attributed to one particular activity, such as costs in the head office for implementing multiple activities. And the rates for costs can be submitted in different ways. And the two usual ways are, established partners typically apply their pre-approved rates from a negotiated indirect cost rate agreement, which is known as a NICRA, that we negotiate with USAID. And if you have a NICRA, you're not going to include costs in the budget that are covered through that. So you don't want to be double dipping. You don't want to be double charging USAID for costs that are already covered. And then new partners without a NICRA may opt to budget costs as direct costs, or you can propose a rate, we call it the 10% de minimis rate. That's a modified total direct cost rate that I think most local partners use. I do know, I feel like a few years ago, there was a push to try to get new partners to have NICRAs, but I know that's a long negotiation process, and I frankly don't know everything that goes into it. It's not the side that I work on, but ensuring that you have that 10% de minimis rate in your budget is really important. And I just wanted to flag that all prime partners are required to provide this 10% de minimis to eligible subawardees. No supporting documentation is needed. This should just be in your budget. So if you're having any challenges or issues with a prime partner about this, know that, you're allowed to have that into your budget, and if needed, escalate the issue so that, all organizations are under the understanding that you're allowed to have this without supporting documentation. Another big piece of the proposal budget is cost share. So I'm sure you're aware of this or have heard it before, but this is, it's also called matching and refers to the resources a recipient contributes to the total cost of an agreement. So USAID has said this is a $20 million activity and they want a 10% cost share. So over and above that 20 million, 10% of that needs to be cost share and contributed by the recipient. So, if it's in the RFA, if it's in the final award, it becomes a condition of the award and part of the approved budget. So you're going to have to report on this, you're going to have to verify it, and you're, like I said, you're going to have to report on it through the life of the project. And only non-US government funds can contribute. So if you're getting other US government funding, you can't use the other US government funds to contribute to the cost share. It has to be from a non-USG, another donor, a private donor. It can be, as you can see on the right, the different potential cost share contributions that can count, staff time, if you're co-locating with the Ministry of Health, you can consider that office space as cost share. So there's a lot of different ways to calculate it and to come up with it. But just wanted to flag that this is a very important part of your award. And, the cost share can and should be flowed down to sub-partners, but there can be risks with that as well. At the end of the day, if you're a prime partner, you're responsible for the cost share. Even if you've asked your sub-partners to contribute, if for some reason they're not unable to meet their cost share requirement, you as the prime are going to be on the hook for that. So you just need to be careful and manage the risk and work with your partners to ensure that they're on track to meet that requirement. And then the budget narrative. So you've put this wonderful, Excel file together with all of these formulas and everything, but, you have to be able to say in the budget narrative what all of those cost categories are. So this is something that should mirror the Excel file and make it easier for reviewers to understand, what you've put in your budget and making sure that it follows that same format. So the budget narrative explains your budget categories, it gives descriptions and justifications for line items, and making sure it's in sufficient detail so that USAID can understand those costs and see how the money will be spent. A quick example here, you have a budget on your left, but on the right is your explanation. So as you can see, it mirrors, there are 3 trips for $1,500 with a total, and that those trips, are Fly America compliant and they're refundable. This is how we found those costs. Again, a little bit lower here on the per diem side, this is the per diem, this is how much it is. It's based on the State Department's, standardized regulations, etc. So it really does get into a lot of detail, but it shows USAID that, it's compliant with their rules and requirements. And so the last couple of slides, and then we'll go back to some Q&A. I know I went through all that quickly, so please feel free to ask questions, but you've gone through your process, you've put together this technical approach, you've put together your budget application, you have your budget, your narrative, you have all of these pieces, and now they need to be packaged, they need to be finalized. So going back to the calendar, you really should leave plenty of time for copy editing at the end, checking for spelling errors, checking grammar, making sure you're using words consistently, that you've spelled out and have an acronym list. Formatting also, making sure you have any required headers or footers, that you have page numbers, that you have signatures where you need them, that the text boxes or tables aren't falling off the side of the page, that your graphics are legible and look good and are positioned correctly. And And it's also where you need to really look at your final compliance and sign off if that's part of your final process. We always, and to this day, I've been doing business development for 12 years, and finalizing and packaging a proposal always takes longer than you think. You never feel like you have enough time, but you have that deadline staring at you that you have to meet. So for submission, you really want to try to submit your application 24 to 48 hours before the deadline. I know that sounds like a lot, but I've heard horror stories. I haven't personally experienced one, of people submitting proposals who forget to attach a file. I had a friend at another INGO tell me about, submission that they forgot to attach the budget file, and no one caught it until USAID came back and said, I'm sorry, you didn't submit all the pieces of your proposal, you've been disqualified. And that's very devastating when you've put in all of this work, all of these months of work, have so many people working on this. You don't want something to mess up your submission to disqualify you. So having that extra time at the end to submit and confirm that the donor has received your submission on time is really, really important. It might be obvious, but ensuring you have the correct email address for the donor if you're submitting it via email. And it's also important to copy others at your organization to make sure that they've received it, that they see that you've attached all the appropriate files. And that's, if you catch something, you have time within that time before the deadline to correct any errors. Also be careful to review the solicitation for any email size restrictions. Some missions, they don't want emails over 5 megabytes. And if you're putting a proposal together, the technical 30-page PDF can be 4 or 5, megabytes. So, there's just really little things like that you need to have a really keen eye for detail to make sure that the email is going to go through the ether and arrive in the donor's inbox on time. And then asking for confirmation of receipt from the donor. You might even need to call the donor if needed. They might not answer quickly via email. And at the start of my career, I can remember staying up late to call Afghanistan because I had to call the Afghanistan mission to ask them if they received our proposal. Because you don't want to put all that work in and then something happen that the donor doesn't receive your proposal on time. And post-submission, you've submitted the proposal, there's relief, there's, congratulations, you did a lot of work. You're not quite done yet, though. You want to debrief if you can with your team, and discuss how you could improve the process for next time. Perhaps preparing for USAID or the donor to come back with questions or clarifications where there are kind of sticking points in your proposal that you need to go back and look at. If USAID notifies you that you weren't successful, you can request in writing a debrief, and this should be within 10 days of notification from USAID. But this is a chance for you to ask USAID to provide you with details on what they viewed as your strengths and weaknesses on your proposal, and using that feedback, to build your expertise, to enhance your systems and reassess, your alignment with donor priorities. It's just a very good way to understand what USAID or a donor was looking for, maybe where you had weaknesses or came up short, and how you can address those for the next time. So that's going to be the end of my presentation. Thank you so much. I will ask Melissa to bring up the final poll. And while she's doing that, we can also go into further Q&A. Jennifer, if you want to come back on, if there's additional questions that were posted. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your time.
Hi, Becky. Thank you. That was great. There are a lot of questions about the de minimis. and what it can be used for. I think this is common. We
Yeah.
do have other ASAP webinars specifically
Mhm.
on this topic, I think, and that's probably your best source for more information. So if this is something you have a lot of questions about, I do direct you to watch those. I think they will be really helpful for you. Becky or others, do you have any comments on the de minimis? There are questions around
Yeah, I see one. What must be taken into account if signing the agreement, if USAID asks for partners to exclude NICRA or de minimis? USAID would never ask you to exclude this. They understand that each organization has overhead costs that it needs to recover in the implementation of a project. So USAID wouldn't or shouldn't ask for you to remove this. If an organization has a NICRA that's accepted from USAID, that's your NICRA, that's automatically going to be used. Again, de minimis, and Susan, you can correct us if we have that webinar on de minimis. I know Doug did one during the local partners meeting, but it is a hot topic, and it's kind of misunderstood and something that everyone needs more education on, because it's very intricate.
Absolutely. So if you were an attendee at the local partner meeting, you can actually log back into the platform that you had the link to, and you can view Doug's indirect cost webinar, where he explains the many parts of the 10% de minimis and NICRA. But we also will be holding webinars in the future on the topic. And then if you follow our newsletter, we try to include information and answer questions as well. So please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A, and we can copy them down. And we also share them with USAID. So highlighting some of these issues, they are very aware that there is some complicated issues involving indirect costs with local partners specifically, and they are working on that internally. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Susan. Yeah, lots of ASAP resources. So if you have topics you have in mind, definitely look there first.
There were some other questions that I think have been partially answered about the difference between contracts and cooperative agreements. And someone's asked the question here, does cost share apply to the FFA mechanism? I'm not sure what the FFA mechanism is, but cost share is an aspect of most cooperative agreements, and it's not on contracts. For contracts, USAID views you as implementing the project for them, and the project is theirs. And so they really have a lot more control. And you can't just move budget line items around or funding around. You can't change any staff without approval. Whereas on cooperative agreements, the implementing organization has much more freedom to make changes and adjust the implementation of the project along the way. And you're noted in the branding. As well, your organization would be featured, whereas for contracts, you can see even in this template that Becky has behind her, IntraHealth is not noted here, it's USAID. So that's a key difference with contracts. The implementing partner isn't featured as much. And for contracts, you have fee, and for cooperative agreements, you have cost share.
Yeah, the FFA mechanism, that's a fixed funding amount, which I think USAID often uses with new partners. It's based on milestones and identifying particular deliverables and paying for those deliverables as the milestone is met. As I understand it, I think those are still cooperative agreements, but just have kind of different reporting and milestone. So others can correct me if I'm wrong. I think cost share could be included into those if they are a cooperative agreement. But I'm not sure how much USAID is using cost share for these programs with local partners. Let's see. Yeah, I see a question. How does a non-US organization obtain a NICRA? So I think you would need to, again, I'm not on the finance side of things, but you can contact USAID. I think they would have information on that, and it is challenging, I will say, for local non-US organizations to obtain them. I think it is possible, but I think it is a long process. So I would maybe do a little researching on USAID's site for how they might handle that, or you can contact their assistance folks. I'm just seeing the poll results come up here. So I'm glad to see, I think it's pretty kind of evenly split about what everyone thought were helpful topics today. Budgeting, I think, is a big one, and live proposal development. What are we doing during those phases? So, if there is interest in having more in-depth sessions on any of these topics, I would encourage you to communicate that with our ASAP colleagues, and we can perhaps see what we can do. I know USAID also has a lot of proposal development modules on their own website that I think gets into details on a lot of these topics as well. So, there's all kinds of organizations that work on proposal development that have different trainings that you can pay for, different modules that you can participate in. So I would encourage you to kind of check out USAID on these pieces, because they know that their own proposal requests are quite require a lot of information and can be quite specific. So looking at that, and we're happy to see what else we can do for you under ASAP.
There are also questions around a sealed bid approach and if it's common and acceptable. I haven't come across this very often as a prime. Typically, we request and receive budgets from all of our partners and submit it all together. I've actually only had this situation come up once where another international partner wanted to submit their budget separately. Mind you, we still submitted their budget narrative, but their actual budget with their NICRA was submitted separately. I wouldn't recommend this. Generally, you want an open relationship with your prime and with your sub. So you want to share information and be clear about your plan and what you're doing and how it works into the overall project. So I would be open. I think the better relationship and information that you can share during the proposal process and the clarity that you have at that stage will result in a stronger proposal, a more cohesive proposal, better informed proposal, taking into account all of your strengths, as well as the other consortium partners, and will likely result in more clarity when you go to implementation. You'll be more aware of what you're doing and what you've agreed on with the prime or the sub, and hopefully be ready to just go into it together. So.
Yeah, I would agree. I've only encountered it a couple of times, but it's definitely not the norm, and I don't think it should be. But organizations have different views on what they see as proprietary information or information that they don't want to share. So, but like Jennifer said, it's really best to be open and sharing that information with your partners. I see questions. The CDC have different rules regarding indirect costs. I don't think so. I think it's the same for all U.S. government agencies. Jennifer, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they all use the same rules and regulations on that. So if it's a U.S. government department agency, they're all gonna to be the same on that.
That's my understanding as well. There was also a question on if you apply for USAID opportunities or receive USAID funding, can you apply for CDC? And the answer is yes, you can. It's good to know the local context. Sometimes CDC really favors their partners in a country and USAID really favors theirs. And collaboration isn't the same in every country amongst the agencies. So the best information you can have locally, the better. But you certainly can apply for opportunities with both agencies.
Well, I think we are at the end of our time. A webinar feedback survey has popped up here, so please do give us your feedback. What's helpful, what's useful to you. If there's any questions we didn't get to, we'll review and try to provide written comments back. But we thank you so much for your time and participation today. We hope it was helpful. And we'll look forward to seeing you in hopefully future ASAP webinars.
Thanks,
Excellent.
Becky. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Rebecca and Jennifer. We really appreciate it and all of the great questions that came in. Thanks again to USAID and PEPFAR for allowing us to put these on. And we're going to go ahead and close it out, but I know everybody wants this recording and presentation. We had lots of requests, so that'll come out to you in the newsletter and also on our ASAP website, which we've shared in the chat. And we look forward to seeing you on the next webinar. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.